So here's the original footage that was shot in the daytime. So that's tracked. So here are the track points from SynthEyes that have been imported into After Effects. So as you can see, they follow just like that. That's making a good camera move. So what I did is I color corrected this first to get the idea of what it was going to look like at night. Then I did another one where I keyed out the sky. And then I add my sky. Now when I make my sky a 3D layer that follows along, which isn't looking too bad, a couple things we have to fix. So then here is another layer of the exact same footage. So I darkened this layer more. Then I masked it so that it was covering just the top part underneath the mountains. And I feathered it as a feather. So that's the new color corrected version. And when you feather it, it creates a gradient. And so what that's doing is it's darkening the sky a little more, and it's also making it so that the trees don't look so keyed out. And then I animated my mask to follow along. So as we're moving, it stays right underneath the mountains and keeps the sky dark and also the background looking appropriate. So layer 1 on top is the darkened version with the mask. And next is my comped version where I took out the sky. Then I have my dark sky image, which goes behind that comped version. But in front of my bottom layer, I have my original layer, but color corrected to look like night. And then I have the original layer. All right, so here's the next example. Here we have the bad guy dragging his chainsaw across the railing, just barely missing Nick, or Raleigh, as he jumps. So again, first I start out with a clean copy. This is the clean daylight shot footage. Then what I do is I color correct it to look like night. So again, I went in and I took out some reds, brought up the blues, took out some saturation to take a lot of the color out. Okay, so we have the moonlit footage now. Then what I do is I add in my sparks. So there, I've added in sparks, right? And right now they're masked. So I can put my sparks anywhere. So what I did was I put a spark and another spark on the railing where it would be, and each time I move it manually and keyframe it so that it follows the chainsaw and the camera move. So then the next step is to add the light that would be illuminating them as the sparks went. So each frame I would lower the opacity of this layer and then increase it some more so that it had a flicker effect. Now this is the same layer. If I get rid of these masks, this is the same daylit shot, but I've color corrected it to have kind of an orangish yellow glow so that when I add those masks in and add a big feather to the outline. So now what I'm doing is I'm illuminating the floor here and Raleigh and Bruno here, or Travis. So that way it looks like there's some light that's reflecting off them. So then with these masks, what I do is I rotoscope these guys and I add keyframes so that the masks follow with them. And around this area, I started to lower the opacity of the layer because he's getting further away from the sparks. So now what I did next, because I had a mask here, it's lighting up this bar which is in the foreground. So I added another layer of the moonlit footage, and I rotoscoped this bar or railing so that it was over the spark, so it doesn't look like the spark is in front of the bar. All right, so first we have our clean plate, which is just him stepping around the corner and pretending to shoot a shotgun. So he just kind of wiggled the shotgun and added some effect to it so that it looked like it was jolting back. It was tough to not have him make gun sounds when he was doing this, but we got past that. So once it gets to a point where it looks like he kind of jerks back right there, and before he reloads, what I did was I put a muzzle flash, which I got from videocopilot.net's Action Essentials 2, and those guys have some great comped effects, and one of them is a shotgun or a gun blast. Now this one I liked a lot because it had the sparks that come out and it had this flame going on, and then they added the smoke along with it. So that's what really sells a gunshot for me, because a lot of people tend to put just a flash in there and then nothing else, and that's never sold a gunshot for me. So once that smoke is there, that makes it look more realistic. So I put in the flash, then I put in a second flash, right there. Now since these are going so fast, it's good to line them up exactly where they should be and where they would look appropriate. But it goes so quickly, so you can get away with a little more. So now that I have my flames, what I want to do is I want to create a blast effect, and I want the camera to shake, even though when we dollied in, we didn't shake the camera. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the wiggle effect and a slider control in After Effects to create this shake effect. So what I do is I go to my footage, which I've now pre-composed into its own composition. And what I did is I've added a slider control and a motion tile. You can find the slider control under Expression, Controls, Slider Control, and Motion Tile, Stylize, Motion Tile. And we'll go into that in just a minute. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the footage, the pre-comp, and I'm going to pull down the transform, and then I'm going to alt-click on position, and that's going to bring up my expression window. I'm going to type in wiggle, which is now utilizing the wiggle effect from your effects and presets. I'm going to type 9, comma. Now this is going to be the speed of the wiggle. I'm going to pick whip. I'm going to bring it up to my slider control. I'm going to close that. So that's now closing in all this. So now what's happening is that my slider control is controlling the amount of wiggle I've put on this shot. So when I increase, it adds more distortion to it and less, and then more the other way. So it's adding a motion blur after I've selected Enable Motion Blur, and on this composition, I've selected the motion blur icon. So now that's where that blur is coming from, right there. If I were to deselect that, it would just move around. But when you add that blur in there, it creates a really cool effect of more of a chaotic feeling. So I start right before the blast happens. I put a keyframe of 0 on slider, and then as soon as the flame happens, I increase by 63.58% so that it really creates some motion, and then I slowly bring it back down to 0 So it's kind of like a sudden jerk and then slow return to 0. And then I add that again on the second blast. So I put a keyframe of 0 on the slider control. And then at the blast, which should actually be right there, I add up 82 to create a more frenetic motion, and then slowly bring it back down to 0. So now that I have my gunshots and my motion, what I do is I bring in a motion tile. And now when I move my frame out of the composition, these pixels are no longer being filled with information. So what I do is I enable a motion tile. I mirror the edges. So now it's recreating pixels from the edges of your shot. And you have to make a few adjustments with the output width and height. So now it's recreating those and you have your shot. And then lastly, what I wanted to do was add in some atmospheric effects. So it's not just a blast, shake, blast, shake. What I did is I added an adjustment layer, click this on. And what I did is I basically lit the room up really fast. So, you know, you could be very detailed on this, but since it goes so quickly, all I did really was add in a glow. If you take this out, there's no glow. And I finessed it so that I wanted it to be the right kind of glow. You know, you can do whatever you want. That's pretty good. And then you can adjust the glow radius. So that obviously doesn't look correct or right. If you make it so that the glow radius is bigger, it does look like it's flaring a bit. And then the intensity, of course, mess with. So then I add keyframes. So again, I add a keyframe right before the blast, and then right on the blast, I'll set it to the highest that I feel it is appropriate. Then again, I'll go 2 frames out and bring the opacity back down to 0. So it's not as quick as in the beginning. There's a bit of a fall off that happens. And then you're back to your original shot. And then I do the same thing for the second blast, right? Add the opacity to 100 after having it at 0. Bam, back down. So actually pretty easy. Sometimes you're going to have to track footage if you want multiple gunshots. This one, of course, is real easy because it's supposedly a shotgun. So it's only 1 blast. There we go. Get it so that's right. And you can mask this too so that it looks correct. But when it goes fast, it's pretty good. So yeah, kind of easy. Got your original layer, pre-comp layer, so that you can add in the motion blur and movement. Then you have the adjustment layer, which brightens up the scene, but this is only for when the flash happens. Then you have your muzzle flash, and then your second one.